Welcome to episode 10 of Metabolism, Diet, and Health with Hunt Bobo, MD. The omega-6 to omega-3 ratio of canola oil is 7 times better than that of extra virgin olive oil. And it's because of the processing that the seed oils have gotten a bad name. But on paper, they look significantly better in many ways to the extra virgin olive oil. And I don't buy into the everything's a polyphenols why they're greater, because they're polyphenols in the canola oil. The processing is what causes the badness in these seed oils, not inherently in the seed oils. Starting here with the Wikipedia page on polyunsaturated fats, there's a three-dimensional representation of linoleic acid, and it is polyunsaturated, has 2 double bonds. They abbreviate this, they use a short term LA, and it is an omega-6. If we count here from the methyl end of the fatty acid, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to where the first double bond is. Then we have linolenic acid down here, alpha linolenic acid, which is another of the 2 essential fatty acids, and it is an omega-3 fatty acid. There's 1, 2, 3. There's a huge literature on the benefits of omega-3 fatty acids over the excess of the omega-6 fatty acids. But there's always exceptions to the rule. You have to have some omega-6 fatty acids. The LA, linoleic acid, is not something we can make regardless of what other fatty acids we get. We have to take it in our diet, and it's essential to life. You won't live without it. In this Wikipedia page, right there near the top, they had a section on thermal degradation. The polyunsaturated fatty acids and culinary oils undergo oxidative deterioration at temperatures of 150 degrees centigrade. It's a grayscale going from no deterioration in the freezer to flame up and turn to carbon dioxide and water if it's past the burning point, and it completely oxidizes to carbon dioxide and water. But 150 degrees is in the cooking range and storage range or processing range that can mess up the good stuff in the fatty acid mixture, which is all seed oils or nut oils, lard, and oils from sea creatures too. They're mixtures, and this mixture is what determines their overall physical and metabolic impact. Now here they have the first table showing the omega-3 fatty acids. The ones that are important are the alpha linolenic acid, ALA, alpha linolenic acid, 18 carbon chains, omega-3, 3 double bonds, cannot be made in our bodies. We have to take it in our diet. EPA, which is one of the most common and non-essential, can be made from the alpha linolenic acid. And my favorite, docosahexaenoic acid, because it's such a beautifully long, symmetric, fully double bonded, is about as much as possible, molecule. These are not actually essential for everybody, but they do make up a huge portion of our lipid membranes around our cells in the brain. This is the most common polyunsaturated fat, this DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. And it is provisionally or conditionally essential in children under the age of 2, and I think in pregnant mothers, because there's only an 8% conversion rate from the alpha linolenic acid into these others. So this goes to that and that, but the conversion rate's not good enough, and you need to take some of that in your diet if you're under 2 and you're pregnant. The source for that DHA is best from marine, cold water marine environments, and the best in the plant world is flaxseed oil. Here are the common omega-6 polyunsaturated fatty acids. Linoleic acid, which is essential. You'll die without it. You have to have this omega-6, so you don't want to get rid of all your omega-6s. The gamma-linolenic acid is an exception to the rule of the omega-6s are inflammatory and the omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. And arachidonic acid is the precursor or root stock from all of the inflammatory prostaglandins and leukotrienes. It causes inflammation and blood clots. You have to have inflammation and blood clots when you need to stop bleeding or fight an infection or heal a wound. You have to have a balance. This idea of having a balance, we all have a balance, and it's different from person to person, and in one person it changes over time. If you're wounded or you're pregnant or you're under 2, you have different requirements. When you get older, you can't metabolize sugar as well, or even as an adolescent, you may lose your ability to metabolize lactose and become lactose intolerant. So not only does your balance and center of balance shift from person to person, but it shifts in one person throughout their lifetime, and you have to keep up with that. You should record what you think is good for you and what's bad for you. Keep it in an accessible place, archival paper, and preferably online in a database that is private and can be given out to your family members and your doctor, not necessarily shared with the public. But this is what your doctor needs to actually help you plan your best medical care. So it's a cooperative venture between you and your doctor. Linoleic acid, LA, is omega-6. Arachidonic acid is the less common precursor to the prostaglandins. But this gamma-linolenic acid, which is exactly the same number of double bonds spaced out at the same intervals in this alpha-linolenic acid, except they're shifted over from the omega-3 position to the omega-6 position. We'll go back up here. It would be just as if this double bond was shifted over to the 6. So we get rid of this double bond and we'd stick it in right here. And it's the same number of carbons and hydrogens, same number of double bonds. They're just shifted over to where the double bonds start at alpha 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's at the 6th carbon from the carboxylic acid group and end at the 6th carbon from the methyl group at the end. So that's the omega-6 and omega-3. And we got these conjugated fatty acids, which are mixtures of different arrangements of these double bonds, and they're less common. The ones that occur in nature and actually have been shown to be good for you, even a trans fat, are in dairy products only. We don't get them from other sources. And I talked about pregnancy and cancer and how it's necessary to have more DHA, docosahexaenoic acid. This is a list in the same Wikipedia page on polyunsaturated fats of common food sources. Avocado oil is similar to olive oil. This is the saturated fat column. These are percentages of total mass. And presumably this is 100% fatty acid. It's oil. purified oil. So it's almost 12%, and this is almost 14%. Very similar. And this is the unsaturated column, 70% unsaturated, 73% monounsaturated. Monounsaturated, it's mostly oleic acid, which is the common one that we have. And they're important to health and proper metabolism. This is the polyunsaturated, or PUFAs, that everybody back when I was in medical school thought were good for you, but they tend to oxidize and go rancid, don't have the same shelf life that the saturated fats would have, or the monounsaturated fats, because the double bonds are reactive, and it's a higher energy state having a double bond than having them oxidized to hydrogen or whatever oxidizes them. So avocado oil has less than half of the PUFAs, which in the 80s were the thing that were good for you, than canola oil. Corn oil is even better, which I'm not suggesting that that's good because of the ratio of omega-6 to omega-3. Look up here at the top, avocado oil is 12.5 to 1. They said 100 years ago we were eating a diet of about 4%, or 4 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, about 4. And this is probably about average for modern times now, about 12%. The canola oil is great. It's a 2 to 1. That's as good as you can get. Corn oil is not good. It is 58 to 1. Has very little omega-3, a lot of omega-6. So it's inflammatory. Stay away from it. Feed it to the cows and horses. Cottonseed, same problem. High omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Flaxseed is the clear winner. It's less than 1. It's 0.2 to 1. 5 times as many omega-3s as omega-6s. And the total amount of PUFAs is 68% compared to monounsaturated fats of 18%. It clearly is the best. The better they are in this more unsaturated category, the more likely they are to oxidize and go rancid and have to be used quickly. And if they're rancid, they're worse for you probably than the ones that have a worse ratio when they're fresh. And they also tastes a little fishy. Saturated fats are quite low in this linseed oil. Basically, flaxseed oil is linseed oil, same thing they use to make furniture. And when it oxidizes, it forms that nice varnish on the wood. Hemp seed oil is a slightly less souped up version of the flaxseed oil. It actually has more PUFA percentage, 82%, than the flaxseed. But the omega-6 to omega-3 ratio is 2.5 to 1. It's not as good as the canola oil. Hemp seed oil is still good, and it's loaded with all that chlorophyll and polyphenols and stuff. And the hemp seed oil and the flaxseed oil, as far as I know, are cold pressed and not processed like the canola oil you buy in the grocery store. You can get this hemp seed oil and this flaxseed oil on the counter in Walmart, right there on the same aisle as the canola oil. Of course, it costs probably 10 times as much. Now we get to extra virgin olive oil, 13% saturated fats, which is kind of mediocre, and the oleic acid for the monounsaturated fats is the big thing, and it's fairly good for you. There's some studies that showed that that's kind of anti-inflammatory and somewhat beneficial. You certainly need oleic acid. It's not a requirement, but it's a healthy thing to eat for a certain moderate amount. Moderation is the key to everything. But it only has 10% of the whole fats and the whole volume by weight, the percent by weight of PUFAs. So it's not a big source of PUFAs. In the ratio between omega-6 to omega-3 just sucks compared to even the avocado oil is 12.5 and this is 14. So there's absolutely no reason in this lipid profile to recommend extra virgin olive oil. I did a taste test when Dr. Rosa brought over a cold-pressed canola oil from a boutique rapeseed processing place up in Canada. And it was smooth, nutty, didn't feel greasy and oily like, say, corn oil would, because it's got all this unsaturated fat in it, didn't coat your mouth, and went down real easy. Would be a great salad dressing or something to use for eating and cooking with, but not high temperature, even though it has a high boil, a high smoke point. The olive oil choked Dr. Rosa, and he coughed, and just, it's got a bite to it. It's peppery, tastes more like grass. The grassiest thing we tasted was the hemp seed. That tasted like you were eating some hay with some oil on it. But it was not greasy, and the olive oil was greasy, coated your mouth. And of course, the olive oil in the freezer test I did last time was the first one to freeze, and it froze in the refrigerator. It became a partially frozen, gelatinous crystal, partly white and semi-solid like butter. So that's that till we get down to, looking at the common ones that are in the grocery store. Soybean oil is a big one. Soybean oil's got a better omega-6 to omega-3 ratio than the olive oil. And it's got a 57% PUFA. It's got a lot more PUFAs than that. But the problem is the big production bean seed oils are taken to the oil mill, and they're extracted with heat and hexane and bleached and additives put into them. They're not processed at all like olive oil. It's the processing. It's not actually the stock that you start with. So the processing, then you go to things like partially hydrogenated, where they bubble hydrogen through with pressure, and a cottonseed oil. If you look on here, this has got the best ratio of everything but flaxseed oil. That's because it has almost no PUFAs. It's got no PUFAs. So this is processing taken to the next level, where you're going to get trans fats. You're going to get all kind of melange of stuff that's not good for you. So the processing's what messes this stuff up. I've got all these other lists in this one table in Wikipedia, but one thing I found interesting in my studying for this was that the only source that has more saturated fats in it than unsaturated fats is dairy products, cream and cheeses and stuff like that. There is no meat that has more saturated fat than unsaturated. These two are unsaturated, both these. Poly and mono unsaturated. In here, the highest one you could find was like ground sirloin. It was still only a little over a third saturated fat. So whatever they say about, lard and meat, that's going to have too much saturated fat. It's actually got twice as much unsaturated fat as it does saturated fat. You look at turkey breast, it's 30. That's only 8% or 3% better than beef and 5% better than pork. And the chicken breast looks like it's the lowest. And here's hot dog. Here's the stuff down here with they had lard fats. Even lard, 39% is still mostly unsaturated. So this is the clinical data that shows that, and there's several papers that do this. This is a clinical proof that canola oil can literally have a healthier effect on your cardiovascular and cancer and overall health than olive oil. I'm a big fan of olive oil because there's been so much good stuff said about it, but one, it doesn't taste as good as some of these others, and two, the data's not there. It's the processing that makes these seed oils toxic, not the primary construction of the oil in the seed. They did a meta-analysis, and they ended up with 13 studies that they enrolled into this. And it clearly showed with these 13 eligible trials that were included that consumption of canola oil significantly reduced the LDL, and they gave the statistics and the confidence interval and p-values, total cholesterol, and the LDL and the cholesterol HDL ratio was not hugely altered, but there was a small change in the right direction. 9 milligrams per deciliter is nothing to sneer at, and it was statistically significant, and there were 13 different trials that went into this. Plain language summary. Consumption of canola oil and olive oil, low in saturated fats. They'd say that more for canola than olive oil, as we just learned. The two oils had lowering blood lipid levels. We found that canola oil was more effective in reducing low-density cholesterol and triglycerides than olive oil. So that's a good study. I'll have these in the description over to the side. And this is another one where they were studying the actual lab values of different markers on a controlled diet. This is randomized. All those 13 studies were randomized and prospective. In this one, they had 72 patients. Mean age was 29. They were polycystic ovarian patients with usually have a insulin resistance and high LDL, hairy lips, and polycystic ovaries with dysmenorrhea and diabetes. The canola oil resulted in a significant reduction in the triglycerides and the triglyceride HDL ratio, and there was no significant reduction following olive oil consumption. So why am I going through all this? I still like olive oil. It's just I think it should be used in minimal moderation. And of course, I suspect most of that stuff we get in a restaurant, they have with the pepper in it, maybe a little salt for you to dip bread into. It's probably 80% vegetable oil and not extra virgin olive oil at all. It's adulterated. There's a huge amount of information out on the web about the false representation and adulteration of these products claiming olive oil, and it's actually just some kind of a mishmash of something that's not olive oil. So the conclusion on this one was lipid profile and liver functions in HOMA-IR, which is another cardiovascular indicator of health, observed following olive oil or canola oil consumption, and not with the olive oil. Here's the paper that describes what happens during the processing. I actually used ultraviolet spectroscopy to produce a paper on how much bischloronitrosourea we recovered from infusing it through a 0.22 micron filter that we use for intracarotid injections for brain tumors. The question was, if we're going to give 300 milligrams of BCNU, does it actually get there? How much is that lipid-soluble, oily stuff that we've suspended in the infusate end up stuck to the filter and the tubing. So I did a scale of dilutions with this bischloroyl nitrosourea that I'm measured out and made dilutions over about 1,000-fold range and imaged them in this one little cheap little machine, a box of, about that big, that you just stick the sample down into and see how much of the ultraviolet light at whatever band we were looking at it with. I picked that out too based on the ideal imaging of the BCNU. Was actually in the tube, and I recorded it and made a beautiful little curve that showed what the levels were. Then I came back and I flushed through multiple different samples through my tubing and stuck it in there to see how much was coming out, and I'd do how much was going in. And I found out we were getting about 87% of the total dose delivered. So I calculated and laboratory analyzed exactly what we were delivering to the patient's artery. Now, some of that did get stuck to the artery a little bit, but most of it eventually washed on through to the capillary bed into the venous bed. We had to know how much we were giving. So I'm familiar with this technique, but they did a much more detailed and had a much better machine that actually gave curves that went all the way through these different spectrums. They imaged from 280 nanometers to 420 nanometers, which is about 15 different points of absorption. And this is the canola oil they're talking about. Has a low amount of saturated fat and a substantial amount of monounsaturated fat. More monounsaturated fat than polyunsaturated fat. And about 2 to 1, it said. In general, it contains 61% oleic acid, which again I said is the most common fatty acid that we consume and have in us. It's a monounsaturated one. And 11% linolenic acid, 21% linoleic acid. So that's the LA, that's ALA. The ALA is omega-3, the LA is omega-6. And that was a 2 to 1. Omega-6, twice as much omega-6 as omega-3, which is far better than almost everything else we eat. The flaxseed is better. And of course the Arctic fatty fish and krill and stuff are probably a lot better too. Canola is second only to olive oil in oleic acid content and intermediate among the other vegetable oils in PUFA content. You remember the corn oil and soybean oil had a lot more PUFA than olive oil did. So back in the 80s, PUFA was good and saturated fat was bad. Things are changing, and now I think I know why fried food was bad for you. It was probably not just necessarily the oil, but the processed oil with all the crap in it from the processing. So PUFA, compared to olive oil and palm oil, is a lot higher in these other things. But the ratio is best only in the canola oil and, of course, flaxseed oil and hemp oil. But the flaxseed oil and hemp oil are so polyunsaturated, they have such a low burning point. You can't heat them up and fry with them or do anything like that with them. In addition, it does contain the phytosterols, vitamin E, and chlorophylls, beta carotene. Beta carotene is the vitamin A precursor. The canola oil for commercial production is heated and extracted with chemicals, especially hexane. Then the hexane has to be removed, and they have to distill it, and then they have to bleach it, and they have to precipitate it. And by law, olive oil is just cold pressed. To be called extra virgin olive oil, it's squeezed out with pressure, can't exceed 27 degrees centigrade, which is warm but not unsurvivable for a human in external temperature. I mean, we have a temperature when we have a fever of 40 degrees centigrade, and 38's fairly normal temperature. The refining process renders the canola oil hydrogenated mess of trans fatty acids, and their consumption may lead to heart problems and increased cancer risk. In this article, they used 3 different types of canola oil. The cold pressed, the chemically extracted with hexane, and then the heat and chemically extracted with hexane that is commercial canola oil. And they found that the commercial canola oil, all 6 or however many brands they tested, did not have any vitamin E, beta carotene, chlorophylls, and that there was a new spike that wasn't present in the cold pressed or the hexane extracted, that was this junk that was created. This is a little cartoon showing how they're just squeezing down on the seeds through a mesh to drop the oil out. There's plenty of videos on YouTube watching oil extraction, and you can look online and order a little home kit to extract seed oil from whatever kind of seeds you have laying around. You could take out some rosemary and squeeze the oil out of it. Then they did the fluorescent spectra, like I was discussing, from 280 to 420 nanometers, which is all ultraviolet. Just the 280 is the one that'll, I think, really hurt you. 420. Now look at the colors on this. The cold pressed is a little bit green. Looks like the chemical extraction maybe took out some of the chlorophyll. And these are all the different commercial brands of canola oil. These are the spectra of the chemically extracted and the commercial brands and cold pressed. I wish I could get this on here where I could let you see both of these. I don't like how they stretch this out from here to here, but this is the same spike as that. This same spike as that. This is a chemically extracted with hexane, and this is cold pressed. There's a difference. You see this red line I drew right in here? That shows that this hump down here at 370 has diminished some. I think they've lost a little bit of that good stuff that's in there, the chlorophyll and other things that hexane didn't get out or favor or came out when they got rid of the hexane. But look at this one over here, the commercial one. This whole business here is at 440. There's nothing here at 440 really to speak of. There's a huge spike of trash, and we've lost all this other stuff here. It's not the same chemical. It's not the same substance. They've taken it and altered it. It's like taking crude oil and turning it into a plastic dinosaur. That plastic dinosaur is a lot different than the crude oil. And they went through all the different spectra. You needed a computer analysis to look at the area under the curve and get the levels and talk about doing standard dilutions to figure out how much is in there. Then they went and studied the effects of heat on this cold pressed canola oil. And this is just the virgin unheated. And we get up here to 200, it starts changing color significantly. There is a little color difference between this one and this one, but very similar all the way across there, and 180 is a cutoff point. Looked to me like, 150 would be a cutoff point before things started really changing. So this is just a little bit of a change, and then it goes, whoop, starts to degrade, and then out here you got a fire, So they study that, and they say if you keep it under 180, you can, saute with it and do a little bit of frying with it. I'm not sure I'm not that much of a fry cook. I don't know if 180 is the adequate to get good fried fish or chicken or whatever. And I did have on here the requirements for the substance to be called extra virgin olive oil. And it can't go over 27 degrees. This is EVOO specifications. Free fatty acid acidity must not exceed 0.8%. The peroxides can exceed 20 milliequivalents per kilogram, which is very little. And the UV absorptions of no more than 0.22 for K270. I guess that must be 270 nanometers. Or no more than 2.5 for 232. So it's got to be a good cold pressed clean product. And can't have anything but olives in it, and nothing added. Only washing, pressure, decantation, and filtration. No heating. Temperature must remain under 27 degrees centigrade, 80 degrees, which is warm but not hot, and had to have a decent taste. So in short, it's the processing. It's not the basic contents of a rapeseed versus an olive. And my little taste test with Dr. Rosa, it seemed like the canola oil actually had a better flavor than the olive oil. Remember, find your balance and try to stick to it. Do everything in moderation and follow your balance as it shifts throughout your life, and record it and pass it on to the next generation and supply it to your doctor so he can help with your medical care in a better manner. It's not a unilateral doctor knows best always. You have to supply the data. And join me next time when we discuss processing. Thank you.